The courthouse hallway echoed with footsteps, each click of Rebecca's designer heels against marble, a pointed reminder of what they were fighting for. "My son wants to live with me, Your Honor." Rebecca's voice carried perfectly through the hushed courtroom, her practiced sincerity making Helen grip the wooden bench until her knuckles turned white. 8 months since they buried her son James, and here they were fighting over the only piece of him left in this world, his 12-year-old son Noah. Helen watched her grandson's shoulders tense beneath his navy blue blazer. Too formal for a boy his age, but Rebecca had insisted he look presentable for court. The same Rebecca who couldn't be bothered to wash his school uniforms or notice when he went 3 days wearing the same t-shirt at home. The same Rebecca who'd been more concerned with rebuilding her social life than nurturing the grieving child who'd lost his father. Judge Davis, a man whose silver hair and lined face spoke of decades witnessing human conflict, adjusted his glasses and addressed Noah directly. "Is that true, young man? Do you want to live with your mother?" The courtroom fell silent. Helen's attorney, Patricia Winters, squeezed her hand in reassurance, but they both knew the reality. Courts favor biological parents. Despite all their documentation of Rebecca's neglect, despite Noah spending more nights at Helen's house than his own over the past months, despite everything, she remained his mother. Noah stood slowly. At 12, he was at that awkward age, no longer a little boy, but not yet a teenager, gangly limbs and a voice that occasionally cracked. James's eyes looked back from his son's face, sending a fresh wave of grief through Helen's chest. "Your Honor." He began, his voice steadier than Helen expected. "May I show you something first?" From his pocket he pulled out his phone, the one Helen had given him for his birthday last month, after Rebecca forgot their mobile upgrade appointment for the 3rd time. "I have a recording from last night. I think it will help you understand." Rebecca's perfectly composed expression slipped. "Objection, Your Honor. Whatever my son recorded was done without my knowledge or consent. That's illegal." Judge Davis interrupted firmly. "Ms. Reynolds in family court, I have considerable latitude to hear evidence, especially from the minor, whose custody is being determined. I'll decide its admissibility after hearing it." He nodded toward Noah. "You may proceed, young man." Noah pressed play, and Rebecca's voice filled the courtroom. Not the carefully modulated tones she'd used before the judge, but sharp, impatient words. "Stop packing that bag, Noah. You're not going to your grandmother's tonight." "But Mom, you said I could when you and Kevin go to the concert. Plans change. Kevin thinks it looks bad if you're always at her house. Once this custody nonsense is settled, you won't be spending so much time with her anyway." "But, no buts. God, you're just like your father, always making everything so difficult. Look, once we get this court thing handled, we're moving to Phoenix with Kevin. His job offer includes a house with a pool. You'll love it. What about Grandma Helen and my friends and dads? Your grandmother has interfered enough. You're my son, not hers. End of discussion." The recording continued with the sound of a door slamming, followed by Noah's quiet crying. Then came another segment. Rebecca speaking to Kevin, her boyfriend of 5 months. "The lawyer says once I have full custody, we'll have more flexibility with Noah's trust fund for educational and living expenses. That old witch won't be able to block anything." Kevin's voice smooth and calculating. "And the house, David's life insurance. The house is already mine, but the insurance mostly went into Noah's trust. That's what I'm telling you. Once we have full custody and move to Arizona, we can petition to be the sole trustees. Helen won't have any say." Judge Davis's expression remained impassive, but his eyes had hardened. He looked directly at Rebecca, whose face had drained of color. "Ms. Reynolds, would you like to explain this recording?" Rebecca recovered quickly, tears springing to her eyes. "Your Honor, I've been under tremendous stress since losing James. Sometimes I say things I don't mean. Noah knows I love him more than anything." Helen bit her tongue so hard she tasted blood. 8 months of watching Rebecca neglect Noah while she rebuilt her social life. 8 months of him showing up at Helen's doorstep hungry or with homework unsigned. 8 months of Rebecca canceling her parenting time at the last minute. And now this performance. Judge Davis wasn't finished. "Noah, is there more to this recording?" Noah nodded, his fingers trembling slightly as he found another timestamp. "This is from later last night when Mom thought I was asleep." He pressed play again. This time they heard Rebecca speaking to Kevin. "The lawyer says once I have full custody, we'll have more flexibility with Noah's trust fund for educational and living expenses. That old witch won't be able to block anything." Kevin's voice smooth and calculating. "And the house, David's life insurance. The house is already mine, but the insurance mostly went into Noah's trust. That's what I'm telling you. Once we have full custody and move to Arizona, we can petition to be the sole trustees. Helen won't have any say." Helen watched the judge's expression darken as the recording continued, detailing Rebecca and Kevin's plans for the money her son had left to secure his child's future. Money that had become, it seemed, Rebecca's primary interest in maintaining custody. When the recording ended, Judge Davis removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. The courtroom remained silent, the truth hanging heavy in the air. "We'll take a 30-minute recess," he finally announced. "When we return, I'll hear final arguments before making my decision." As they filed out of the courtroom, Patricia leaned close. "That recording changes everything, Helen. Judges hate when financial motives drive custody battles." Helen nodded, but couldn't speak past the knot in her throat. This wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy. Her grandson had been forced to expose his own mother's callousness to protect himself. In the hallway, Noah slipped his hand into hers, something he hadn't done in public since he was 9, considering it too babyish. The simple gesture nearly broke her. "I'm sorry, Grandma," he whispered. "I didn't want to embarrass Mom, but you have nothing to apologize for," Helen assured him. "Nothing at all." Over his shoulder, she caught Rebecca's gaze, cold and calculating, beneath her mask of maternal concern. The woman her son had once loved enough to marry, to start a family with, was a stranger to her now. As they waited to return to the courtroom, Helen thought about James, her brilliant, kind-hearted son, who had updated his will just weeks before the accident that took his life, as if some part of him had sensed the need to protect his child's future. She remembered his words during that last visit, when he'd looked at her with uncharacteristic seriousness. "Mom, I love her, but I know who she really is. If anything ever happens to me, protect Noah at all costs." Helen had nodded, then never imagining she would need to fulfill that promise so soon. She also thought about her daughter Amanda, who had flown in from Seattle to support them despite her demanding surgical residency. And she thought about Noah, forced to grow up too quickly in the past 8 months. The bailiff called them back into the courtroom, and Helen straightened her shoulders, ready to face whatever came next. For Noah, for James, for the family that remained. Judge Davis's decision still echoed in Helen's ears as she unlocked the door to her home, now officially Noah's home, as well, at least temporarily. Temporary full custody is granted to the maternal grandmother Helen Carter, pending a full home study and psychological evaluation of all parties. The court finds sufficient evidence of potential financial exploitation to warrant immediate intervention. Rebecca's face when the ruling was announced would haunt Helen for years, shock dissolving into calculated fury as she realized her plans had unraveled in the space of a 30-minute recording. Her parting words in the courthouse parking lot still hung in the air between Helen and Noah. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." "Can I put my stuff in the blue room?" Noah asked, breaking the silence as they entered the house. The blue room had been his designated space in Helen's home since he was a toddler, gradually evolving from nursery to child's bedroom to the current preteen haven with its space posters and bookshelf full of science fiction. "Of course," Helen replied, trying to sound normal, as if this were just another weekend visit and not the beginning of a new chapter neither of them had anticipated. "Are you hungry? I could make grilled cheese." He nodded, dropping his backpack by the stairs. "Mom didn't. There wasn't much breakfast this morning. She was busy getting ready for court." The casual mention of Rebecca's neglect, so commonplace that Noah mentioned it without emphasis, tightened something in Helen's chest. How long had this been his normal? How much had she missed while trying to respect Rebecca's role as his mother? As she prepared lunch, her phone rang. Amanda calling from Seattle, anxious for news. "The judge gave me temporary custody," Helen told her daughter, keeping her voice low as Noah arranged his belongings upstairs. "But it's just the beginning. Rebecca's already threatening to fight." "Of course she is," Amanda replied. her voice tight with the same frustration Helen felt. Money has always been her primary motivation. Remember how quickly she tried to sell the house after Dad died? Helen did remember. Just 6 weeks after her husband Robert's funeral 3 years ago, Rebecca had suggested that downsizing might be healing for everyone. James had shut down the idea immediately, recognizing it as a transparent attempt to access equity rather than emotional closure. "The good news," Amanda continued, "is that I've arranged to take a 2-week leave from the hospital. I'll fly in tomorrow to help with everything." Relief washed over Helen. Amanda, her practical, determined daughter, who had followed her father into medicine, would be a crucial ally in the days ahead. At 34, she balanced her father's analytical mind with Helen's own stubborn perseverance, qualities they would need in abundance. "Mom," Noah's voice from the doorway pulled her back to the present. "Is that Aunt Amanda?" Helen handed him the phone, watching as his face brightened during their conversation. Amanda had always been his champion, from teaching him to ride a bike when James was traveling for work to defending him fiercely when Rebecca suggested his struggles in math were due to not trying hard enough rather than the dyslexia that was later diagnosed. As they chatted, Helen's phone pinged with a text message from Patricia. Rebecca's lawyer requesting emergency hearing to overturn temporary custody order, claiming recording was illegal and grandson was coerced. "Court date next Tuesday. Don't worry, we're prepared." The brief moment of peace shattered. Of course Rebecca wouldn't accept the judge's decision. Of course she would claim manipulation. The trust fund James had established for Noah was substantial, nearly $2 million from his life insurance and company shares with Helen and Amanda as co-trustees until Noah turned 25. In their recording, Rebecca and Kevin had made it clear they believed gaining custody was the first step to accessing those funds. "Grandma." Noah's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He stood holding her phone, his expression suddenly years older than his 12 years. "Mom's calling. Should I answer?" The court order included reasonable phone contact between Noah and Rebecca. Helen nodded, though every instinct wanted to shield him from whatever manipulative tactics Rebecca might employ. "Hi, Mom," he answered, his voice carefully neutral. Even from across the kitchen, Helen could hear Rebecca's agitated tone, though not her specific words. Noah's face remained impressively stoic as he listened. "No, I wasn't coached, because it was the truth. No, Grandma didn't tell me to record anything. I did it because—" He fell silent, listening again. Then, with a firmness that startled Helen, "I don't want to move to Phoenix with Kevin. I want to stay here in Dad's house in my school with Grandma and my friends." Another pause. "I know you're my mom. That doesn't mean—" He stopped again, his expression clouding. "That's not fair. Dad wouldn't want—" Whatever Rebecca said next made him flinch. He handed Helen the phone without another word and walked out of the kitchen, his shoulders rigid with suppressed emotion. "Rebecca!" Helen began, keeping her voice level, despite the anger boiling beneath the surface. "You've turned my son against me," Rebecca hissed, dispensing with any pretense of civility. "Congratulations, Helen. I hope you're satisfied." Noah made his own recording and his own decision to show the judge, Helen replied evenly. "If you're unhappy with how you appear in that recording, perhaps you should reflect on your own behavior, not blame a 12-year-old boy or his grandmother." "This is temporary," Rebecca spat. "I'm his mother. No judge is going to permanently give custody to a 67-year-old woman over a biological parent." The jab at Helen's age was deliberate and cutting. She was active and healthy, but the 15-year age gap between her children meant she was indeed older than most grandparents of 12-year-olds. It was a card Rebecca would undoubtedly play in court. "I'm not trying to replace you," Helen said, maintaining her composure with effort. "I'm trying to provide stability for Noah while you sort through your priorities." "My priority is my son." "Is it because based on that recording your priority seems to be his trust fund?" The silence that followed was brittle with rage. When Rebecca spoke again, her voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Helen. None at all." The line went dead. Helen stood in her kitchen phone, still pressed to her ear, a chill settling between her shoulder blades. In the 8 months since James's death, she had watched Rebecca transform from grieving widow to negligent mother to calculated opponent. What would she become next, now that her financial plans had been temporarily thwarted? From upstairs came the faint sound of Noah's guitar, halting chords of the song James had been teaching him before the accident. The familiar melody steadied Helen, a reminder of what was at stake. Her phone pinged with another text, this time from Amanda. "Flight lands 10:15 a.m. tomorrow. Don't worry, Mom. We've got this." Helen took a deep breath and began assembling grilled cheese sandwiches, choosing normalcy as her shield against the storm she knew was gathering. Noah needed stability now more than ever, and she was determined to provide it, no matter what Rebecca might do next. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Richard Morgan, her 70-year-old neighbor and retired police officer, standing on her porch with concern etched into his weathered face. "Helen, I heard about the custody hearing from Diane." Richard's voice carried the weight of 40 years in law enforcement. "I wanted you to know I've seen what's been happening these past months. Noah showing up here alone at all hours. That boyfriend of hers coming and going at midnight. I'm ready to testify if you need me to." The unexpected offer of support brought tears to Helen's eyes. "Thank you, Richard. That means more than you know." He nodded, his expression softening. "Robert was a good man, and James was too. They'd be proud of how you're fighting for that boy." He glanced past her to where Noah's backpack lay by the stairs. "Noah's a good kid, too good for what he's been put through. You let me know if you need anything, day or night." As Richard left, Helen felt a flicker of hope ignite. Perhaps she wasn't as alone in this battle as she'd thought. As she carried lunch upstairs to Noah's room, she silently thanked James for his foresight in creating that trust with Helen and Amanda as trustees. Without it, Rebecca might have already depleted the funds meant to secure his son's future. With it, they at least had financial leverage in the battle ahead. What they didn't have was any idea how far Rebecca would go to regain control not just of Noah, but of the money she believed should be hers. Amanda's arrival the following morning brought a surge of energy into the house. Her daughter had always been a force of nature, efficient, direct, and fiercely protective of those she loved. As a pediatric surgeon, she channeled these qualities into saving children's lives. Now she would use them to help save her nephew. "I've already spoken with 3 child psychologists who specialize in custody evaluations," she announced before her suitcase had even hit the guest room floor. "And I've compiled Noah's medical records showing the pattern of missed appointments and delayed vaccinations over the past 8 months. Helen smiled despite her exhaustion. "Hello to you too, sweetheart. Coffee?" Amanda paused, then laughed ruefully. "Sorry, Mom. Doctor mode." She embraced Helen tightly. "How are you holding up?" "Really?" "I'm managing," Helen replied, leading her to the kitchen. "It's Noah I'm worried about. He's trying so hard to be brave, but this is taking a toll." Noah was at school his first day back since the custody hearing. Helen had given him the option to stay home, but he'd insisted on maintaining his routine. Dad always said education comes first. He'd reminded her in a perfect imitation of James's serious tone that nearly broke her heart. "Where is Rebecca staying?" Amanda asked, accepting the coffee mug Helen offered. "At the house, as far as I know. The judge didn't order her to leave the family home, just granted me temporary custody of Noah." Helen sighed, sinking into a kitchen chair. "That's another complication. Legally, the house belongs to Rebecca as James's widow, though the mortgage is being paid from Noah's trust, as James specified in his will." Amanda's expression hardened. "So she's living in a house essentially paid for by Noah's inheritance while plotting how to get control of the rest of his money." Before Helen could respond, her phone rang. Patricia Winters, her attorney. "Helen, we have a situation," she began without preamble. "Rebecca's filed an emergency motion claiming elder exploitation." "What?" The accusation was so absurd, Helen nearly laughed. "She's alleging you're using Noah to access his trust fund for your own benefit. She's demanding a full financial audit of all expenditures since James's death." The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so infuriating. "That's ridiculous. Amanda and I haven't used a penny of that money except for the mortgage payments and Noah's school tuition exactly as James's will stipulated. I know that, and the financial records will prove it, but it's a clever tactical move. It shifts focus from her recorded plans to exploit the trust to unfounded allegations against you. Amanda, reading Helen's expression, reached for her free hand. There's more, Patricia continued. She's also requesting supervised visitation for you, claiming you're emotionally manipulating Noah and turning him against his mother. That's absurd, Helen protested. I've never spoken against Rebecca to Noah, even when— I believe you, Patricia interrupted gently, but the court will need to investigate all allegations. Expect a guardian ad litem to be appointed for Noah and home visits from family services. After ending the call, Helen relayed everything to Amanda, whose medical training couldn't fully mask her fury. This is classic Darvo, she declared. Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. Rebecca's taking exactly what she's guilty of and projecting it onto you. The financial audit doesn't worry me, Helen said. We've been meticulous about the trust, but the allegation that I'm manipulating Noah— She shook her head, the unfairness cutting deep. I've bent over backward trying not to criticize Rebecca in front of him, even when she's canceled plans or left him waiting for hours. Amanda's expression softened. Mom, anyone who spends 5 minutes with you and Noah will see the truth. You've been his rock while Rebecca's been— She trailed off, diplomatic even in anger. We need to prepare Noah, Helen said, glancing at the clock. School dismissed in 2 hours. He needs to understand that things might get more complicated before they get better. Let me pick him up today, Amanda suggested. I'll take him for ice cream, ease him into the conversation. Coming from his cool aunt might make it less scary. Helen nodded gratefully. Amanda had always had a special bond with Noah, built on science experiments, secret handshakes, and an understanding that transcended the aunt-nephew relationship. In many ways, she'd become a maternal figure when Rebecca's attention wandered, especially after James's death. While Amanda went to collect Noah, Helen called her neighbor and closest friend Diane, who had been her confidant throughout this ordeal. She's claiming what? Diane exclaimed when Helen explained Rebecca's latest allegations. Helen, that's outrageous. You've been practically keeping that boy alive while she parades around town with her new boyfriend. The court doesn't know that, Helen pointed out. They only know what's presented as evidence. Then we need more evidence, Diane said firmly. I've seen Noah coming to your house hungry because there's no food at home. I've watched Rebecca drop him off and disappear for days. The entire neighborhood has witnessed her negligence. Would you be willing to make a statement? Helen asked hesitantly. Involving others meant expanding the circle of conflict, something she'd been reluctant to do. I'll do better than that, Diane replied. I'll organize statements from the whole neighborhood. The Patels next door, Richard across the street. We've all seen what's been happening. It's time we spoke up. By the time Amanda returned with Noah, his favorite mint chocolate chip ice cream, having softened the blow of the latest developments, Helen had emails from 5 neighbors offering detailed accounts of Rebecca's neglect and Helen's consistent presence in Noah's life. Grandma Aunt Amanda says Mom's telling lies about you, Noah said as he entered the kitchen, his expression troubled but determined. I can tell the judge what really happened. I have more recordings. Helen exchanged glances with Amanda, concerned about putting Noah in the middle of an increasingly hostile battle. What kind of recordings? Amanda asked carefully. Times when Mom forgot to pick me up from school, when she left me alone all weekend with just $20 for food, when she and Kevin were talking about selling Dad's watch collection that was supposed to be mine when I'm older. He pulled out his phone. I've been keeping track of everything since you showed me how to use the voice memo app, Aunt Amanda. Helen's heart ached for this child who had felt the need to document his own neglect, even as she felt a surge of pride at his resourcefulness. Noah, Helen said gently, we don't want you to feel responsible for the legal aspects of this situation. That's for the adults to handle. He looked at her with eyes too wise for his 12 years. Dad always said we have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. I'm not letting Mom hurt you because of me, Grandma. I'm not. In that moment, Helen saw James so clearly in his son that tears sprang to her eyes. Amanda, noticing smoothly, suggested Noah show her his latest science project upstairs, giving Helen a moment to compose herself. Alone in the kitchen, Helen looked at the growing collection of evidence on her laptop. Financial records, neighbor statements, Noah's recordings, and wondered how they had arrived at this point, how the woman her son had loved enough to marry had become an adversary, willing to destroy anyone in her path to financial gain. And she wondered with a chill she couldn't shake just how far Rebecca would go when she realized the neighborhood was rallying against her, that Noah had been documenting her neglect, and that her carefully constructed narrative was beginning to unravel. The answer she feared would prove far worse than anything they had prepared for. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked past midnight as Helen sat reviewing the financial records Patricia had requested. Each statement, each transaction meticulously documented according to James's wishes. No irregularities, nothing that could possibly be construed as exploitation. Yet the very need to defend herself against such allegations left a bitter taste. She closed her laptop and moved to the window, gazing out at the quiet suburban street where she'd raised her own children. The same street where Noah had learned to ride his bike, where James had built a treehouse in the sprawling oak, where memories of 3 generations layered like sediment in the earth beneath their feet. Rebecca might legally own the house next door, but she would never understand what truly made it a home. The light in Noah's room had gone out hours ago, but Helen knew from experience that sleep didn't come easily to him these days. Nightmares about the accident that took his father, anxiety about the custody battle, the impossible weight of feeling responsible for adult problems. No child should have to carry such burdens. "You can't sleep either," Amanda's voice came from behind her. Helen turned to find her daughter in the doorway, medical journal in hand. Even on leave, Amanda never stopped learning, preparing, improving. So much like her father. "Just thinking," Helen replied, "about what James would do if he were here." Amanda set her journal down and joined Helen by the window. "He'd fight like hell, just like we're doing." "But what if we're making it worse, putting Noah through all this?" "You heard what that woman said on the recording, Mom. She was going to move him to Phoenix, away from everything familiar, just to get control of his money. That's not love. That's exploitation." Helen sighed, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. "I just keep wondering if there's another way, something less adversarial." Amanda's expression softened in the dim light. "You've always been the peacemaker, Mom. It's what made you such a good teacher all those years. But sometimes peace isn't an option. Sometimes you have to fight for what's right, even when it's messy." The words, so similar to what Noah had said earlier, so clearly echoing James, settled something in Helen's heart. Amanda was right. This wasn't about her comfort or Rebecca's feelings. This was about protecting a child's future, just as she'd promised James she would. "When did you get so wise?" Helen asked, a small smile breaking through her worry. Amanda's laugh was soft in the quiet house. "I had a pretty good teacher." The next morning brought sunshine streaming through the windows, at odds with the storm brewing in their lives. Noah came downstairs in his favorite NASA t-shirt, hair still damp from the shower, a determined set to his young shoulders. "I've been thinking," he announced, as Helen placed pancakes in front of him. "We should have a plan, like a real strategic plan. Dad always said good planning beats good luck every time." "What kind of plan did you have in mind?" Helen asked, exchanging a glance with Amanda across the kitchen island. "For when Mom tries something else, because she will." The matter-of-fact certainty in his voice broke Helen's heart, even as it impressed her. "We need security cameras, and backup copies of all my recordings, and someone should be with me at all times when I'm not at school." Amanda set down her coffee mug. "Those are actually excellent suggestions, buddy. In fact, I was just about to order a security system online." "And I've already made copies of your recordings and stored them securely," Helen added. "As for someone being with you, that's already our plan. One of us will always pick you up from school, and either Diane or Richard has agreed to be on call if neither of us can be here." Noah nodded, visibly relieved that the adults were taking his concerns seriously. "Good, because Mom can be creative when she wants something." The doorbell rang, interrupting their breakfast planning session. Helen opened it to find a small, professionally dressed Asian woman on her doorstep. "Mrs. Carter, I'm Sophia Torres from Child Protective Services. I'm here for a home visit following a report concerning your grandson, Noah Reynolds." Helen's stomach dropped, but she maintained her composure, stepping back to allow the social worker inside. "Of course. We've been expecting someone from your office. Please come in." "Expecting me?" Ms. Torres raised an eyebrow as she entered. "My attorney advised us that Rebecca Reynolds had filed several complaints," Helen explained, leading her to the living room where Amanda and Noah now stood. "This is my daughter, Dr. Amanda Carter, and my grandson, Noah." Ms. Torres nodded to them both, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp, assessing. "Noah, would it be all right if you showed me your room while I speak with you privately?" "It's upstairs," Noah replied, visibly uncomfortable but cooperative. "The blue room." As Noah led the social worker upstairs, Helen sank onto the couch, the reality of their situation crashing over her again. "That was fast. Patricia said to expect CPS, but I didn't think they'd be here the very next day." "Rebecca's not wasting any time," Amanda agreed, her voice low. "But this could actually work in our favor. Ms. Torres will see firsthand that Noah is well cared for here, and it creates a record of Rebecca's pattern of false accusations." Helen nodded, trying to focus on the strategic advantage, rather than the humiliation of being investigated for neglect of the child she'd been desperately trying to protect. Upstairs, Noah was giving Ms. Torres a tour of his room, pointing out his science fair trophies and the telescope by the window that had been a gift from his father. Helen could hear the nervousness in his voice, the effort to appear normal when nothing about this situation was normal. After inspecting Noah's room, Ms. Torres asked to see the rest of the house, methodically checking the refrigerator for appropriate food, inspecting the bathrooms for cleanliness, noting the child-proofed medicine cabinet, despite Noah's age. "Would you mind if I speak with Noah alone for a few minutes?" she asked Helen when the tour was complete. "Of course not," Helen replied, though every instinct screamed to stay close to her grandson. "We'll be in the kitchen if you need anything." Helen and Amanda sat in tense silence, straining to hear the murmur of voices from the living room, but unable to make out specific words. "She seems fair," Amanda whispered. "Professional." "Let's hope so," Helen replied, hands clasped so tightly her fingers ached. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, Ms. Torres called them back to the living room. Noah sat on the couch, his expression a mix of relief and lingering tension. "Mrs. Carter, I want to be transparent with you," Ms. Torres began. "We receive many reports during custody disputes, and we're required to investigate all of them. What I've seen today doesn't raise any concerns about Noah's welfare in your care." Relief washed over Helen. "Thank you. I understand you're doing your job. However," Ms. Torres continued carefully, "I should inform you that the reporter made multiple allegations. This was just the initial visit. There may be follow-up investigations." After she left, Amanda called Patricia immediately. "Rebecca's weaponizing the system against us. First social media, now CPS. What's next?" "Unfortunately, this is textbook high-conflict custody behavior," Patricia replied. "The good news is that judges recognize these patterns. Each false report actually strengthens our position for the final custody determination." But the constant attacks were taking a toll. Helen found herself jumping at unexpected noises, checking the windows, obsessively scrutinizing every aspect of Noah's care for potential vulnerabilities Rebecca might exploit. Noah, meanwhile, was showing signs of increasing anxiety, trouble sleeping, decreased appetite, startling easily. When Amanda suggested he speak with a therapist, he initially resisted. "I'm not crazy," he insisted. "I'm just worried about what Mom might do next." "Therapy isn't for crazy people," Amanda explained gently. "It's for anyone navigating difficult situations like surgeons who need physical therapy after long surgeries strain their backs." The medical comparison resonated with him, and he reluctantly agreed. Dr. Kavita Shaw, a child psychologist specializing in family trauma, quickly established rapport with Noah. After their third session, she requested to speak with Helen privately. "Noah is remarkably resilient," she began, "but he's carrying an unhealthy burden of responsibility. He believes he needs to protect you from his mother." Helen's heart sank. That's exactly what I've tried to prevent. Children are perceptive, Dr. Shaw said kindly. He sees the strain you're under regardless of how well you think you're hiding it. But there's something else concerning me. She hesitated. Noah mentioned his mother has been sending him private messages, suggesting that if he tells the truth and comes home, she'll drop all legal actions against you. The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty, using Noah's love for Helen as leverage against him. He's refused her offers, Dr. Shaw continued, but each refusal increases his anxiety. He's essentially being asked to choose between his own well-being and yours. Helen closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength. What can we do? First, consider blocking direct communication between Noah and his mother, except through monitored channels. Second, Noah needs reassurance that the adults will solve these problems, not him. And third, she met Helen's gaze directly. You need support too, Mrs. Carter. This situation would challenge anyone, let alone someone processing their own grief for their son. That evening, after discussing Dr. Shaw's recommendations with Amanda and Patricia, they filed an emergency motion requesting that all communication between Rebecca and Noah be conducted through a court-approved co-parenting app that would document all exchanges. As Helen prepared dinner, trying to maintain some semblance of normal routine, Amanda received a text that made her expression darken. "What now?" Helen asked, dreading the answer. "It's from Dad's old colleague at the hospital," she replied slowly. Rebecca was just hired as an administrative assistant in the billing department, the same department that handles all employee medical records. The implications hit Helen immediately. Amanda's position as co-trustee of Noah's trust made her as much a target as Helen. If Rebecca gained access to her medical information, "I'll call HR in the morning," Amanda said, already composing an email to her supervisor and the hospital legal department. That night, as Noah finally slept peacefully with the help of Dr. Shaw's recommended bedtime routine, Amanda and Helen sat on the porch, the security lights casting long shadows across the yard. "She's not going to stop," Amanda said quietly. "Every time we block one avenue, she finds another." Helen watched the shadows, remembering how James had played in this very yard as a child, how he'd later taught Noah to ride a bike on this same stretch of concrete. "No, she's not going to stop," she agreed, "which means we need to find a way to end this conclusively." "How?" Amanda asked. "We're already doing everything legally possible." Helen considered the question, thinking about all she'd learned about Rebecca in the 8 months since James's death, her patterns, her motivations, her weaknesses. "She wants Noah's money," she said slowly. "Everything else is secondary. What if we use that against her?" Amanda turned to her curiosity, replacing exhaustion in her expression. "What are you thinking, Mom?" "Something James would probably call crazy," Helen admitted. "But maybe crazy is exactly what we need right now." Silence becomes a weapon when words have failed. In the stillness between heartbeats, Helen made her decision. The path forward wasn't righteous or pure, it was necessary. Sometimes love means walking through fire to protect what matters most. The first sign of Rebecca's retaliation came at 3:00 a.m., a shattering crash that jolted Helen from sleep. She fumbled for her phone, heart pounding as she dialed 911. "Someone's broken my front window," she whispered to the dispatcher, keeping her voice low. "My grandson is in the house. Please hurry." The glass made a delicate tinkling sound as it settled on the hardwood floor below, beautiful and deadly in the moonlight. She crept to Noah's room, relieved to find him still asleep, then cautiously approached the stairs. Glass glittered across her living room floor, surrounding a brick with a note attached, "Drop the case or worse next time." The crude threat made her stomach clench, not from fear for herself, but for Noah. When the police arrived minutes later, they documented everything methodically. The brick, the note, the shattered window, but their expressions remained professionally neutral when Helen suggested Rebecca might be responsible. "Mrs. Carter will investigate all possibilities," the officer said carefully. "But without witnesses or camera footage, it's difficult to establish who did this." By morning, Amanda had installed a security system with cameras covering every approach to the house, while Noah watched wide-eyed the reality of the situation finally penetrating his stoic facade. "Mom wouldn't really do that, would she?" he asked as they swept up the last glass shards. "Throw a brick through your window." Helen chose her words carefully, weighing truth against protection. "I don't know, sweetheart. People sometimes make poor choices when they're desperate." "It was Kevin," Amanda stated flatly, once Noah was out of earshot. "Rebecca's too calculating to do something this crude herself, but he's exactly the type to think intimidation will work." Patricia, when informed, immediately filed for a restraining order and submitted the incident as evidence of escalation. "This actually helps our case," she explained over speakerphone. "It demonstrates the lengths they'll go to maintain control." 2 days later, the second attack came. Not physical, but perhaps more damaging. Rebecca launched a social media campaign portraying herself as a grieving widow being separated from her son by a controlling mother-in-law. The posts included carefully edited photos of happier times with James and Noah, interspersed with tearful videos about grandparent alienation and elder financial abuse. The comments section filled with outrage from strangers who knew nothing of the truth. Worse, several distant relatives and casual acquaintances began sharing the posts, adding their own shocked reactions. Noah's former baseball coach commented, "Always seemed like a devoted mother to me, hard to believe." James's college roommate chimed in, "This doesn't sound like the Helen I knew." Even the school counselor had viewed the posts, pulling Noah aside at lunch to ask if everything was okay at home, a question that left him furious and humiliated. "She's creating an alternate reality," Amanda fumed, scrolling through the growing digital narrative. "One where she's the devoted mother and you're the villain." Helen felt sick watching the fabrication spread. "Should we respond? Try to correct the record," Patricia advised against it. "The court won't be influenced by social media drama. Engaging only validates her platform and makes you look defensive. Document everything but don't respond publicly." The restraint was difficult, especially when Noah discovered the posts while researching a school project. "She's lying about you," he said, voice shaking with anger. "And about me. She's saying I was manipulated, that I didn't really want to live with you." Helen held him close, feeling his thin shoulders trembling beneath her hands. "The truth doesn't need to shout to be heard, Noah. The judge will see through this." But even as she reassured him, she worried. Public perception could influence even the most impartial legal proceedings, and Rebecca was crafting a compelling fictional narrative. Each new post gathered more sympathetic comments, more shares, more momentum. The digital witch hunt had begun, and Helen, a woman who'd never even had a Facebook account, was ill-equipped to fight it. Diane arrived that evening with a casserole and fierce determination. "I've started a counter-campaign," she announced, setting the dish on the counter. "Nothing direct, we're not mentioning Rebecca or responding to her posts. Just sharing stories about you and Noah, the community garden you started at his school, the reading program you volunteer for, the real Helen Carter." The gesture brought tears to Helen's eyes. "You didn't have to do that." "Of course I did." Diane squeezed her hand. "When wolves circle, the pack protects its own. You've been there for half the neighborhood over the years. Now it's our turn." The following day brought the third escalation, a formal visit from Child Protective Services, prompted by an anonymous report claiming Helen was medically neglecting Noah. The social worker, Sophia Torres, returned with a medical specialist in tow, requesting access to Noah's health records, and questioning Helen about his medication schedule for the mild asthma he'd developed after his father's death. Helen sat in the kitchen with Amanda, both of them tense despite having nothing to hide. "This is absurd," Amanda whispered furiously. "You've taken him to every doctor's appointment since James died. He's healthier and more stable now than he's been in months." When Ms. Torres finally concluded her inspection, her expression had softened noticeably. "Mrs. Carter, I want to be transparent with you. We receive many reports during custody disputes, and we're required to investigate all of them. What I've seen today doesn't raise any concerns about Noah's welfare in your care." Relief washed over Helen. "Thank you. I understand you're doing your job. However," Ms. Torres continued carefully, I should inform you that the reporter made multiple allegations. This was just the initial visit. There may be follow-up investigations. After she left, Amanda called Patricia immediately. Rebecca's weaponizing the system against us. First social media, now CPS. What's next? Unfortunately, this is textbook high-conflict custody behavior, Patricia replied. The good news is that judges recognize these patterns. Each false report actually strengthens our position for the final custody determination. But the constant attacks were taking a toll. Helen found herself jumping at unexpected noises, checking the security cameras, obsessively scrutinizing every aspect of Noah's care for potential vulnerabilities Rebecca might exploit. The siege mentality had crept into their lives, transforming the home that had once been a sanctuary into contested territory. Noah, meanwhile, was showing signs of increasing anxiety trouble, sleeping, decreased appetite, startling easily. His grades, previously excellent, had begun to slip. His science teacher emailed Helen about a missed assignment, something that had never happened before. When Helen gently inquired, Noah admitted he couldn't concentrate in class, too worried about what might happen next. "Maybe I should just go back to Mom," he suggested one evening, voice small in the gathering darkness. Then all this would stop. The words cut deeper than any brick through a window. Helen knelt beside his bed, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Is that what you want, sweetheart?" He shook his head, tears spilling over. "No. I want to stay with you, but I hate what she's doing to you because of me. Listen to me, Noah." Helen took his hands, warm and small, in her own. "None of this is because of you. None of it is your fault. And I wouldn't trade having you here for anything. Not for peace, not for safety, not for anything. We're going to get through this together." When Amanda suggested he speak with a therapist, he initially resisted. "I'm not crazy," he insisted. "I'm just worried about what Mom might do next." "Therapy isn't for crazy people," Amanda explained. "It's for anyone navigating difficult situations, like surgeons who need physical therapy after long surgeries strain their backs." The medical comparison resonated with him, and he reluctantly agreed. Dr. Kavita Shah, a child psychologist specializing in family trauma, quickly established rapport with Noah. After their third session, she requested to speak with Helen privately. "Noah is remarkably resilient," she began, "but he's carrying an unhealthy burden of responsibility. He believes he needs to protect you from his mother." Helen's heart sank. "That's exactly what I've tried to prevent." "Children are perceptive," Dr. Shah said. "He sees the strain you're under regardless of how well you think you're hiding it. But there's something else concerning me." She hesitated. Noah mentioned his mother has been sending him private messages, suggesting that if he tells the truth and comes home, she'll drop all legal actions against you. The manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty, using Noah's love for Helen as leverage against him. "He's refused her offers," Dr. Shah continued, "but each refusal increases his anxiety. He's essentially being asked to choose between his own well-being and yours." Helen closed her eyes briefly, gathering strength from somewhere deep within. "What can we do?" "First, consider blocking direct communication between Noah and his mother, except through monitored channels. Second, Noah needs reassurance that the adults will solve these problems, not him. And third," she met Helen's gaze directly, "you need support too, Mrs. Carter. This situation would challenge anyone, let alone someone processing their own grief for their son." That evening, after discussing Dr. Shah's recommendations with Amanda and Patricia, they filed an emergency motion requesting that all communication between Rebecca and Noah be conducted through a court-approved co-parenting app that would document all exchanges. The judge approved it the next morning, a small victory in their ongoing battle. As Helen prepared dinner that evening, trying to maintain some semblance of normal routine, Amanda received a text that made her expression darken. "What now?" Helen asked, dreading the answer. "It's from Dad's old colleague at the hospital," she replied slowly. Rebecca was just hired as an administrative assistant in the billing department, the same department that handles all employee medical records. The implications hit Helen immediately. Amanda's position as co-trustee of Noah's trust made her as much a target as Helen. If Rebecca gained access to her medical information, who knew what she might fabricate or manipulate to discredit Amanda professionally or personally? "I'll call HR in the morning," Amanda said, already composing an email to her supervisor and the hospital legal department. That night, as Noah finally slept peacefully, with the help of Dr. Shaw's recommended bedtime routine, Amanda and Helen sat on the porch, the security lights casting long shadows across the yard. "She's not going to stop," Amanda said quietly. "Every time we block one avenue, she finds another." Helen watched the shadows, remembering how James had played in this very yard as a child, how he'd later taught Noah to ride a bike on this same stretch of concrete. The memories were everywhere, invisible threads connecting past to present, the living to those gone. "No, she's not going to stop," she agreed, "which means we need to find a way to end this conclusively." "How?" Amanda asked. "We're already doing everything legally possible." Helen considered the question, thinking about all she'd learned about Rebecca in the 8 months since James's death. Her patterns, her motivations, her weaknesses. "She wants Noah's money," she said slowly. "Everything else is secondary. What if we use that against her?" Amanda turned to her curiosity, replacing exhaustion in her expression. "What are you thinking, Mom?" "Something James would probably call crazy," Helen admitted. "But maybe crazy is exactly what we need right now." "You want to do what?" Patricia stared at Helen across her office desk, the next morning coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. "Offer Rebecca money to walk away." "Not from Noah's trust," Helen clarified. "That remains untouchable. Personal funds." Amanda, seated beside her, nodded. "Mom's been thinking this through all night. Rebecca's actions are financially motivated. If we address that motivation directly, we might be able to resolve this without dragging Noah through months of escalating conflict." Patricia set down her cup carefully. "Helen, I understand the impulse, but paying off someone making false allegations could be interpreted as an admission of guilt. Why would an innocent person pay to make a problem go away?" "Because an innocent person might prioritize a child's well-being over being right," Helen countered. "Every day this continues damages Noah further. The brick through the window, the CPS visit the social media campaign, it's death by 1,000 cuts, and Noah feels every one of them. Not to mention," Amanda added, "Rebecca's new position at the hospital gives her potential access to sensitive information. We've alerted HR, but systems have vulnerabilities. The longer this drags on, the more creative she'll become." Patricia leaned back, fingers steepled beneath her chin, a posture Helen recognized from their previous consultations. She was considering all angles, which was precisely why Helen had hired her. "Let's assume the court grants you permanent custody," she said finally. "Rebecca would still have visitation rights. She'd remain in Noah's life with ongoing opportunities to manipulate and undermine." "That's the second part of the proposal," Helen explained. "We don't just offer money. We offer a clean break, a significant sum, in exchange for voluntary termination of parental rights." The suggestion hung in the air, radical even to Helen's own ears. Termination of parental rights was the nuclear option in family law, typically reserved for cases of severe abuse or abandonment. "Voluntary termination is extremely rare," Patricia said slowly. "Most courts won't even consider it without another parent ready to adopt, which is why it would need to be Rebecca's idea, not ours," Amanda interjected. "We don't suggest termination. We simply make a financial offer for her to resolve the situation completely and see what she proposes." Patricia's expression remained skeptical. Even if she suggested it herself, a judge would scrutinize any agreement heavily. There would need to be a compelling reason beyond financial consideration. "What about relocation?" Helen suggested. Rebecca mentioned moving to Phoenix with Kevin. If she presented termination as a compassionate choice, allowing Noah stability rather than cross-country visitation, it might be more palatable to the court. "And if she brought up the idea first," Amanda added, "after we've established a pattern of her prioritizing money over Noah's welfare, it would reinforce our narrative rather than undermine it." Patricia tapped her pen thoughtfully against her legal pad. "It's unorthodox," she admitted. "But given the circumstances, how would you envision approaching her?" "Not directly," Helen said firmly. "That's too risky. We need a neutral third party, someone who could float the concept without it being traced back to us." "I might have an idea," Amanda said slowly. "Kevin's ex-wife is a scrub nurse at my hospital. From what I've heard, they had an extremely contentious divorce, largely due to financial issues. She might be motivated to disrupt his latest meal ticket." Patricia raised an eyebrow. "You want to recruit the boyfriend's ex-wife as an intermediary? That's creative problem-solving," Amanda finished with a hint of her father's dry humor. "Something surgeons excel at." "It's risky," Helen acknowledged, "but every option before us carries risk. This at least gives us some control over the narrative." After another hour of discussion, refining the approach and anticipating potential pitfalls, Patricia reluctantly agreed to draft a neutral settlement offer, one that mentioned financial compensation, without specifying the purpose carefully worded to avoid any suggestion of impropriety. "Remember," she cautioned as they prepared to leave, "this needs to appear as though you're merely open to resolving the conflict efficiently. Nothing that could be construed as buying custody or encouraging termination of rights. Those suggestions need to come from Rebecca, documented without our fingerprints anywhere near them." As Helen and Amanda drove home, the weight of what they were considering settled heavily on Helen's shoulders. Was she truly prepared to essentially purchase her grandson's freedom from his mother? What would James think of such a strategy? "You're second-guessing," Amanda observed, reading her expression with the same perceptiveness she'd inherited from her father. "Wouldn't you?" Helen sighed. "It feels mercenary." "It's pragmatic," Amanda corrected. "Dad was an idealist in many ways, but as a doctor he understood triage. Sometimes you have to address the most immediate threat to preserve what matters most." "And if it works," Helen asked, "if Rebecca actually agrees to termination, what do we tell Noah? That his mother sold her rights for a payout?" Amanda's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "We tell him the truth in age-appropriate ways, that his mother made choices that prioritized her happiness over his well-being, that sometimes adults fail their children not because the children are unlovable, but because the adults are damaged." "That's a heavy burden for a 12-year-old. "It's already his burden, Mom. He's living it every day. The only question is whether we help him understand it or leave him to interpret it alone." When they arrived home, Diane was on the porch with Noah supervising as he repainted the railing, a project he'd requested, explaining solemnly that constructive activities help process difficult emotions, according to Dr. Shaw. "Perfect timing," Diane called as they approached. "We're just finishing the first coat. Noah has quite the eye for detail." Noah looked up, paint smudged across one cheek, the first genuine smile Helen had seen in days lighting his face. "Grandma, do you like the blue? It's almost the same color Dad and I painted my treehouse." The simple joy in his expression, the connection to James he was working to maintain, strengthened Helen's resolve. This child deserved stability, security, and peace, not to be a pawn in his mother's financial schemes. That evening, after Noah had gone to bed, Amanda made the call to Kevin's ex-wife, carefully framing the conversation as one healthcare professional to another, concerned about a child caught in an increasingly volatile situation. Lisa Jenkins, it turned out, had been following the social media drama with growing disgust. "Kevin cleaned me out during our divorce," she told Amanda. "Left me with nothing but debt while he walked away with our savings and a new sports car. I've been waiting for him to try the same scam on someone else." The alliance, unconventional as it was, took shape quickly. Lisa would casually mention to a mutual friend that she'd heard Rebecca and Noah were locked in an expensive court battle that could drag on for years. She'd suggest that with Rebecca's plans to move to Phoenix, a clean break might be better for everyone, especially if there was financial incentive to walk away completely. 3 days later, as Noah and Helen worked in the garden, her phone rang with an unknown number. "Helen," Rebecca's voice was cool, controlled. "I think it's time we discussed a permanent resolution to our situation, one that benefits everyone involved." Helen met Amanda's gaze across the yard, where she'd been pretending to read while actually monitoring the security cameras. "I'm listening," she replied, matching Rebecca's businesslike tone, while her heart raced with cautious hope. The first piece of their strategy had worked. Now came the delicate part, allowing Rebecca to believe the most reprehensible solution was her own brilliant idea. "Let's be practical about this situation." Rebecca continued, her voice carrying the smooth confidence of someone who believes they're in control. "This legal battle is costly for everyone involved emotionally and financially. There's a simpler solution." Helen remained silent, letting her fill the space, a technique she'd learned during her years teaching high school English. The most revealing statements often emerge when people are uncomfortable with silence. "I'm considering relocating to Phoenix with Kevin," Rebecca continued after a moment. "His job offer includes significant advancement opportunities, and frankly, there are too many painful memories here since James's death." "I understand," Helen replied neutrally, giving nothing away. "Noah has mentioned you were discussing a move." A brief hesitation. "Yes, well, that's part of what I wanted to discuss. Long-distance co-parenting would be challenging, especially with our current dynamics." Helen could almost hear her calculating her next words, weighing how direct to be about her true intentions. "It occurs to me," Rebecca finally said, "that there might be an arrangement that would benefit everyone. Noah is clearly attached to you and Amanda. He's established at his school, has his friends here. Uprooting him might not be in his best interest." The sudden concern for Noah's welfare would have been touching if it weren't so transparently strategic. Helen remained silent, waiting. "I'm wondering if we might consider a more permanent arrangement," Rebecca continued, her voice dropping slightly as if sharing a confidence. "One where Noah remains with you and I move forward with my life in Phoenix." "What exactly are you proposing, Rebecca?" Helen asked, careful to keep any hint of eagerness from her voice. "A clean break," she replied promptly. "I've been researching options. Did you know that voluntary termination of parental rights is possible under certain circumstances, particularly when another family member is prepared to assume full responsibility?" And there it was, the suggestion they'd hoped she would make, now presented as her own compassionate idea. Patricia had warned them to let Rebecca articulate the proposition clearly, to create an unambiguous record of her initiative. "That's a significant step," Helen observed, deliberately neutral. "Termination of rights is permanent." "Exactly," Rebecca agreed, a new eagerness entering her voice. "No more court battles, no more conflict. Noah stays where he's comfortable, and I can move forward without constant legal entanglements." "I see," Helen said carefully. "And what would this arrangement entail, practically speaking?" The brief pause told her they'd reached the crux of the conversation, the part Rebecca had been leading toward all along. "Well, there would be financial considerations," she said delicately. "After all, I'd be relinquishing my claim to make decisions about Noah's future, including his inheritance management." "You're suggesting compensation," Helen clarified, ensuring the terms were explicit. "I prefer to think of it as recognition of the sacrifice involved," Rebecca countered smoothly. "I am his mother after all. Legally walking away from that relationship deserves acknowledgement." Helen took a steadying breath, feeling Amanda's attentive gaze from across the yard. "What kind of acknowledgement did you have in mind?" $250,000, Rebecca stated without hesitation, as if she'd calculated the precise value of her maternal rights. "A one-time payment, after which I would voluntarily terminate all parental rights and legal claims regarding Noah." The amount was actually less than they'd anticipated, revealing either Rebecca's underestimation of her negotiating position or the depth of her eagerness to cash out and leave. "That's a significant request," Helen replied, stalling while she processed the proposal. "I would need to consult with my attorney about the legality of such an arrangement." "Of course," Rebecca agreed readily. "I've already spoken with mine. It's unconventional, but not unprecedented. The key is presenting it to the court as a mutual recognition that Noah's stability is best served by remaining with you while I pursue opportunities that would otherwise require disrupting his life." Her rehearsed explanation sounded reasonable, even altruistic, a mother sacrificing her rights for her child's well-being with financial compensation, merely an incidental factor. The narrative was cleverly constructed to disguise the reality she was selling her son for $250,000. "I'll need to think about this," Helen said, unwilling to appear too eager, despite the surge of hope Rebecca's proposal had triggered, and discuss it with Amanda, as she's co-trustee of Noah's inheritance. "I understand," Rebecca replied, an edge of impatience now audible beneath her composed exterior. "But I should mention that Kevin's position has a definite timeline. We would need to relocate within the next month to secure the opportunity, so a prompt decision would be appreciated." The artificial deadline was transparent, a classic high-pressure sales tactic, but Helen didn't challenge it. Let her believe her strategy was working. "I'll get back to you within a few days," she promised. "This isn't a decision to be made lightly." After ending the call, Helen walked over to Amanda, who had abandoned any pretense of reading. "250,000, she reported quietly, mindful of Noah working nearby. "For complete termination of rights." Amanda's eyebrows rose. "That's all I was expecting, at least double that. She must be desperate to leave. Or Kevin's opportunity is time-sensitive for reasons she hasn't shared," Helen observed. "So we counter-offer?" Amanda asked. Helen shook her head slowly. "No, we accept her terms, but with conditions. The money is placed in escrow, released only after termination is finalized, and she's physically relocated to Phoenix, and we include a non-disclosure agreement. She never discusses this arrangement publicly or with Noah." "She'll want some of the money up front," Amanda predicted. "A small percentage, perhaps, but the majority remains contingent on completed termination. Otherwise, what prevents her from taking an initial payment and then dragging out the process?" They spent the evening carefully planning their response, consulting with Patricia via secure video call to ensure every aspect of their counterproposal was legally sound and ethically defensible. "The court will scrutinize this arrangement heavily," Patricia reminded them. "The judge needs to believe termination truly serves Noah's best interests, not just the adult's convenience, which is why Rebecca's relocation is crucial to the narrative." "She's not abandoning her child," Amanda pointed out. "She's recognizing that forcing him to choose between his established support system and moving cross-country with her would be harmful." "And the financial component," Patricia pressed, "is a practical recognition that she's relinquishing future decision-making regarding Noah's inheritance," Helen supplied, "not payment for termination itself." The distinction was subtle but significant, a careful threading of legal and ethical needles that might allow this unconventional solution to pass judicial review. Later that night, after finalizing their response to Rebecca's proposition, Helen sat on the edge of Noah's bed, watching him sleep. His features relaxed in slumber, free from the anxiety that had marked his waking hours since this ordeal began. The worn stuffed dinosaur tucked under his arm, a gift from James on his 5th birthday, was a poignant reminder of all he had already lost. Was she doing the right thing, facilitating the severance of his relationship with his mother, however flawed she might be? Or was she protecting him from years of manipulation and disappointment at the hands of someone who valued money above his well-being? There were no perfect answers, only difficult choices made with imperfect information. But looking at her grandson's peaceful face, Helen knew with bone-deep certainty that she would walk through fire to protect him from further harm. If that meant paying Rebecca to remove herself permanently from his life, so be it. Some might call it distasteful or mercenary. Helen called it the price of peace, an investment in Noah's future security that James would have made without hesitation. Tomorrow, they would set the wheels in motion. For better or worse, they were committed to their course not from vindictiveness or revenge, but from the quiet understanding that sometimes loving someone means making the hardest choices imaginable on their behalf. Choices that might look ugly from the outside, but spring from the deepest wellspring of protection. Choices that only make sense to those who have stood in the darkest trenches of family warfare and glimpsed what survival truly costs. Helen gently tucked the blanket around Noah's shoulders and whispered, "You'll never have to choose, little one, not as long as I'm here." The promise settled in her heart, a covenant between the living and the dead, between grandmother and grandson, between the family they had been and the family they would forge from the fragments that remained. The Starbucks on Main Street provided the neutral territory Patricia had recommended for their meeting with Rebecca and her attorney. Public enough to discourage outbursts, private enough for discreet conversation at a corner table. Amanda had insisted on accompanying Helen despite her protests that she should be conserving her limited leave time. "I'm a trustee too," she had reminded her mother firmly. "Besides, Rebecca is less likely to try manipulation tactics with both of us present." They arrived 15 minutes early, a strategic decision to claim the optimal seating position. Patricia joined them shortly after, meticulously organized as always, with color-coded folders containing their counter-proposal and supporting documentation. "Remember," she cautioned in a low voice, "let me lead the legal discussion. If Rebecca tries to engage you emotionally, redirect to the practical aspects of the agreement." Helen nodded, her eyes fixed on the door. The coffee in front of her had grown cold, untouched. She couldn't help but think of the countless times she'd sat in this very coffee shop with James, watching him grow from gangly teenager to confident adult over cups of hot chocolate that gradually became lattes, then black coffee. How strange that she now sat here negotiating the price of his child's freedom from the woman he had once loved. Rebecca arrived precisely on time, accompanied by a sleek man in his 50s, whose tailored suit and calculated smile marked him as the type of attorney who specialized in aggressive negotiation. Kevin waited outside in the parking lot, a detail that struck Helen as oddly telling. He wanted the benefits of Rebecca's potential windfall, but preferred to keep his hands clean of the actual transaction. "Helen Amanda." Rebecca nodded curtly as she took her seat, all pretense of familial warmth abandoned now that they'd moved to the business phase of their relationship. "This is Gregory Walsh, my attorney." After brief introductions, Patricia opened her primary folder. "We've reviewed your client's proposal for voluntary termination of parental rights in conjunction with her relocation plans. My clients are prepared to accept the financial terms with certain conditions." Walsh raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by their lack of resistance to the amount. "What conditions?" Patricia slid a document across the table. "The full agreement is outlined here, but essentially, the $250,000 would be placed in escrow, with 15% released upon signing the preliminary agreement, and the remainder dispersed after court approval of termination and verification of Ms. Reynolds' relocation to Arizona." Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly. "That could take months." "Approximately 60 days, Patricia corrected. "We've researched the typical timeline for uncontested termination cases in this jurisdiction. The court prioritizes resolution when all parties are in agreement." Walsh reviewed the document with practiced efficiency. "There's also a non-disclosure provision here. Standard in family settlements," Patricia replied evenly. "It prohibits all parties from discussing the financial terms of the agreement publicly or with the minor child." "That seems reasonable," Walsh acknowledged, still scanning the document. "However, the relocation verification is problematic. My client's timeline is contingent on her partner's employment opportunity, which may be flexible." Helen recognized the negotiating tactic, immediately creating an artificial obstacle to concede later in exchange for a more significant concession from them. Patricia evidently recognized it too, as she didn't immediately respond. "The relocation component is non-negotiable," Amanda stated firmly, speaking for the first time. "The court will require a compelling reason for termination beyond financial consideration. Ms. Reynolds' decision to pursue opportunities incompatible with Noah's established life here provides that justification." Rebecca's confident facade cracked slightly. "Are you suggesting I need to actually move to Phoenix for this to work?" "That is precisely what we're saying," Helen confirmed, meeting her gaze directly. "The narrative presented to the court must be truthful and verifiable. You are choosing to relocate for professional and personal opportunities, recognizing that uprooting Noah would be detrimental to his well-being." A flash of calculation crossed Rebecca's face as she exchanged glances with Walsh. "And if our plans change after the termination is finalized, the agreement includes a 2-year non-residency clause for the metropolitan area," Patricia pointed out, indicating the relevant section. "After that, you're free to live wherever you choose, but the initial relocation must be genuine and documented." Walsh leaned close to Rebecca, whispering something that caused her to frown momentarily before her expression smoothed back into practiced neutrality. "The escrow arrangement is acceptable," Walsh said after their brief consultation. "However, we propose 25% released upon signing rather than 15%, and will need specific parameters defining what constitutes verification of relocation." The negotiation continued for nearly 2 hours, addressing every detail from the timeline for court filings to the specific language that would be presented to the judge. Throughout the discussion, Helen noticed Rebecca's attention repeatedly drifting to the parking lot, where Kevin waited as if seeking invisible guidance or reassurance. Finally, Walsh closed his portfolio. "I believe we've addressed all substantive points. I'll revise the agreement according to our discussion and circulate it for review by tomorrow afternoon." As they prepared to leave, Rebecca suddenly asked, "What about Noah's things? His clothes, his electronics?" The question, the first that centered on Noah himself, rather than financial or legal considerations, caught Helen off guard. For a moment, she glimpsed something almost like genuine concern in Rebecca's expression. "We can arrange for you to pack his belongings while he's at school," Helen offered. "Or we can pack them for you, whatever you prefer." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded. "I'll do it. There are a few things I want to make sure he keeps. Things from James." The unexpected mention of Helen's son sent a pang through her chest. She sometimes forgot that despite everything Rebecca had once loved, James had built a life with him, had given birth to their child. What had transformed that young woman into the person sitting across from her, now clinically negotiating away her relationship with their son? "I'll let you know when Noah will be out of the house for several hours," Helen said quietly. "You can have that time privately." Something flashed across Rebecca's face. Gratitude, regret, before her composed mask returned. "Thank you." As they walked to their cars, Amanda voiced the question that had been circling in Helen's mind. "Do you think she'll actually go through with it once the reality sets in?" Patricia considered this thoughtfully. The financial motivation is strong, and she's clearly invested in her new relationship, but terminating parental rights is profoundly final. Some clients experience last-minute hesitation when faced with signing the actual documents. "She won't hesitate," Helen said with quiet certainty. "Not if the money is sufficient, and her path forward with Kevin remains clear." "How can you be so sure?" Amanda asked. Helen thought about the woman she'd observed over the 8 months since James's death, her calculated decisions, her shifting priorities, her fundamental self-interest. "Because Rebecca has already emotionally terminated her relationship with Noah. The legal formality is just catching up to the reality she's already created." As Helen unlocked her car, she caught sight of Kevin watching them from across the parking lot, his expression a mixture of impatience and avarice. In that moment, she understood with perfect clarity that their negotiation wasn't really with Rebecca at all. She was merely the conduit for his ambitions, a realization that both strengthened Helen's resolve and deepened her sadness for the family James had once believed in. "Let's go home," she said to Amanda. "Noah will be wondering how the meeting went." What she wouldn't tell him not yet was how his mother had put a price tag on their relationship and how readily they had agreed to pay it. "Why does Mom need to pack my stuff?" Noah asked, confusion clouding his face, as Helen explained the arrangements for the following day. "I'm staying here, right?" They sat at the kitchen table, afternoon sunlight streaming through windows that had been replaced after the brick incident. 3 weeks had passed since their negotiation meeting. The revised agreement had been signed, the initial payment transferred to escrow, and preliminary court paperwork filed. Tomorrow, Rebecca would come to collect Noah's belongings from the family home while he spent the day with Amanda at the Science Museum. "Yes, you're staying here," Helen assured him. "But since your mom is moving to Phoenix, she needs to sort through your things at her house and decide what should come here permanently." It wasn't the complete truth, but it was age-appropriate, the approach Dr. Shaw had recommended as they prepared Noah for the changes ahead. They hadn't yet explained the concept of termination of parental rights, instead focusing on the more immediate reality of Rebecca's relocation. Noah frowned, processing this information with the careful deliberation that reminded Helen so much of James. "Does she have to move? Couldn't she stay here and we could figure out, normal custody stuff? The question revealed what Helen had suspected beneath Noah's apparent acceptance of the situation. Part of him still hoped for reconciliation with his mother. Despite her neglect, despite the recorded evidence of her priorities, she remained his mother. That primal bond couldn't be severed by logic alone. "Your mom has made her decision," Helen said gently. "She believes this move represents an important opportunity for her future with Kevin." "More important than me," Noah said flatly, the hurt barely concealed beneath his matter-of-fact tone. Helen resisted the urge to agree or to disparage Rebecca. Dr. Shaw had emphasized the importance of allowing Noah to form his own conclusions without adult influence. "I can't speak to your mom's priorities, Noah. I can only tell you that Amanda and I are committed to providing you with stability and support no matter what." He nodded, but his expression remained troubled. "Can I at least call her tomorrow to say goodbye before she packs everything up?" The request caught Helen off guard. Since the custody hearing, Noah had shown little interest in communicating with Rebecca, especially after discovering her social media campaign against Helen. The supervised calls mandated by the temporary custody order had been brief and awkward. "Of course," Helen agreed, reaching for her phone. "Would you like to call her now?" He shook his head. "No, tomorrow is better. Before she starts packing, I just want to tell her something." The cryptic response triggered a flutter of concern, but Helen respected his privacy. Noah had demonstrated remarkable maturity throughout this ordeal. He deserved some agency in managing his relationship with his mother, even as it approached its legal conclusion. Later that evening, as Helen and Amanda prepared dinner, she shared Noah's request. "Do you think we should be worried about what he wants to tell her?" Helen asked her knife, pausing over the bell pepper she was slicing. Amanda considered this as she stirred the pasta sauce. "He's not confrontational by nature. My guess is he wants closure, perhaps to ask questions he's been hesitant to voice in our presence." She hesitated before adding, "or to make one last attempt to change her mind." The possibility sent a chill through Helen despite the kitchen's warmth. Even if that's his intention, would it be wrong to allow it? If Rebecca chose Noah over Phoenix, and Kevin, wouldn't that ultimately be better for him? A mother who actually prioritizes her child. The question gave Helen pause. Had she become so focused on winning this battle that she'd lost sight of what might truly be best for Noah? If Rebecca had a last-minute change of heart, rejected the money, and committed to genuine co-parenting, wouldn't that represent healing rather than defeat? "You're right," Helen acknowledged. "If she chose Noah, I would adjust." The words felt inadequate to describe the complex recalibration such a development would require, but they were honest. "She won't," Amanda said quietly, her certainty matching Helen's own earlier assessment. "But Noah needs to know he was given every opportunity to maintain that relationship. Otherwise, he might spend years wondering if he could have prevented the rupture." Shaw confirmed this perspective during their phone consultation that evening after Noah had gone to bed. "Allowing Noah some agency in this transition is crucial for his long-term adjustment," she explained. "Even if the conversation is painful, it's better than the alternative of feeling powerless in a situation that fundamentally alters his life." The following morning brought unseasonable rain matching the somber mood as Noah prepared for his day with Amanda. He seemed withdrawn, responding to questions with monosyllables and picking at his breakfast without enthusiasm. "You can call your mom from the car before we reach the museum," Amanda offered as they prepared to leave. "I'll give you privacy." Noah nodded, clutching his phone with unusual intensity. As they headed toward the door, he suddenly turned back and hugged Helen fiercely, a spontaneous gesture that caught her by surprise. "Love you, Grandma," he whispered, before pulling away, eyes suspiciously bright. "Love you too," Helen replied, throat tight with emotion. "Have fun at the museum." After they departed, Helen busied herself with practical tasks, laundry, meal preparation for the week ahead, organizing the guest room that would soon become Noah's permanent space. Anything to distract from the knowledge that across town, Rebecca was systematically removing herself from her son's life. Patricia called mid-morning with an update. "Rebecca's attorney has confirmed she'll be at the house from noon until 3. The court date for the termination hearing has been set for 3 weeks from today. Assuming all goes as planned, this should be finalized before the new school year begins." Has she mentioned any hesitation? Helen asked, still processing her conversation with Amanda the previous evening. None, Patricia replied firmly. In fact, she's requested information about expediting the process if possible. She's eager to complete the relocation. The confirmation simultaneously relieved and saddened Helen. Relieved because it suggested their path to stability for Noah remained clear. Saddened because no mother should be eager to sever ties with her child, regardless of circumstances. Shortly after noon, Emma texted, "Call with R complete, brief but intense. N upset but processing, continuing with museum plans. Home around 4. Helen resisted the urge to ask for details, knowing Amanda would share what was appropriate when they returned. Instead, she focused on preparing Noah's favorite lasagna for dinner, a small comfort, after what was clearly a difficult emotional experience. At precisely 3 Huzras, her phone rang with Rebecca's number. Helen answered, cautiously uncertain what to expect after Noah's conversation with her. "I finished at the house," Rebecca said without preamble, her voice strangely subdued. "Everything's sorted and labeled. Noah's clothes are packed in suitcases in his room. The things he specifically asked for are in boxes marked with his name." "Thank you," Helen replied, matching her businesslike tone. "Is there anything else you need before the court date?" A pause lengthy enough that Helen checked to ensure the call hadn't disconnected. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "He asked me why the money was more important than he was." The simple, devastating question hung between them unanswerable in its brutal clarity. "What did you tell him?" Helen finally asked, when it became clear Rebecca wouldn't continue without prompting. "The truth," she said, her voice steadying. "That I'm not cut out to be a mother. That I never wanted that role but tried because James did. That he deserves better than what I can give him." The raw honesty surprised Helen, contrasting sharply with the calculated manipulation Rebecca had demonstrated throughout their legal battle. "That must have been a difficult conversation," she offered neutrally. "He said he forgives me," Rebecca continued, disregarding Helen's comment. "Can you imagine? After everything he said, he forgives me and hopes I'll be happy in Phoenix." For the first time since James's death, Helen heard genuine emotion in Rebecca's voice. Not the performative display she'd cultivated for court appearances, but authentic pain, and perhaps a flicker of the person she might have been under different circumstances. "Noah has his father's capacity for compassion," Helen said quietly. "Yes," Rebecca agreed, the single word laden with recognition of all she was relinquishing. "Take care of him, Helen." The call ended before Helen could respond, leaving her standing in her kitchen, surrounded by the ingredients for Noah's favorite meal, contemplating the unexpected glimpse of humanity from a woman she had come to view as little more than an adversary. When Amanda and Noah returned that afternoon, Helen knew immediately from their expressions that something significant had shifted. Noah's eyes were reddened but clear, his posture straighter than it had been in months, as if a weight had been lifted from his young shoulders. "I told Mom it was okay for her to go," he announced without preamble, "that she doesn't have to pretend anymore, that we'll both be better off this way." The simple declaration, delivered with quiet dignity, marked the beginning of their healing, not as victors in a custody battle, but as a family rebuilding from shared loss. The family court looked different in late summer light, less intimidating than it had appeared during their initial custody hearing 3 months earlier. Perhaps it was the change in circumstances, or perhaps it was Noah's calm demeanor as they walked up the granite steps together. But the building seemed to have transformed from an arena of conflict to a place of resolution. "Remember," Patricia reminded them as they gathered outside courtroom C, "this proceeding is primarily procedural. Judge Davis has reviewed all documentation and conducted private interviews with both Noah and Rebecca. Unless he identifies significant concerns today, should be straightforward." Noah nodded, solemn in his navy blazer and khaki pants, the same outfit he'd worn to the first hearing, now slightly too small after a summer growth spurt. At 12, verging on 13, he stood at the threshold between childhood and adolescence, forced to navigate adult complexities while still collecting Pokémon cards and building elaborate Lego structures. Amanda adjusted his slightly crooked tie. "You don't have to say anything unless the judge directly asks you a question," she assured him. "And if you feel uncomfortable at any point, just look at us. We can request a break." "I'm okay," Noah replied, with the quiet confidence he'd been gradually reclaiming since his conversation with Rebecca. The past 3 weeks had brought noticeable changes: improved sleep, increased appetite, renewed interest in activities he'd abandoned during the custody battle. Dr. Shaw described it as the natural resilience of childhood asserting itself once the primary source of stress is addressed. As they entered the courtroom, Helen spotted Rebecca and Kevin already seated on the opposite side. She wore a conservative gray dress that conveyed appropriate seriousness for the occasion, while Kevin's expression betrayed barely concealed impatience, a man eager to complete a transaction and move forward. Judge Davis entered promptly at 9:00, his manner businesslike but not cold. After preliminary statements from both attorneys outlining the voluntary termination agreement, he addressed Rebecca directly. "Ms. Reynolds, I've reviewed your petition for voluntary termination of parental rights, along with the supporting documentation and our private discussion. Before proceeding, I must confirm for the record, do you fully understand that termination of parental rights is permanent and irreversible?" Rebecca stood, hands clasped before her. "Yes, Your Honor. And you understand that upon termination, you will have no legal right to visitation, communication, or input regarding any aspect of your son's life." "I understand," she confirmed, her voice steady. Judge Davis studied her carefully. "In most cases of voluntary termination, the court requires extraordinary circumstances or a step-parent adoption. Neither applies here. Why should I approve this petition?" Patricia had prepared them for this question, the central issue any family court judge would need to address. "Your Honor." Rebecca began following the narrative they had carefully constructed during negotiations. "My relocation to Phoenix represents a significant opportunity for professional advancement and personal growth. Attempting to maintain a cross-country co-parenting relationship would create instability for Noah, particularly given our challenging history. He has a stable, loving home with his grandmother and aunt, continuity in his school and community, and ongoing therapeutic support processing his father's death." She paused, then added something that hadn't been rehearsed. "Most importantly, Noah deserves parents who can fully commit to his well-being. Helen and Amanda Carter have demonstrated that commitment consistently. I have not." The simple admission, honest in a way Helen hadn't expected, seemed to register with Judge Davis, whose expression softened slightly. "Mr. Walsh." The judge addressed Rebecca's attorney. "The court notes a financial settlement associated with this termination. Would you characterize this as payment for parental rights?" Walsh responded smoothly. "Not at all, Your Honor. The settlement addresses practical matters related to Ms. Reynolds' relocation and recognizes the significant financial responsibility the Carters are assuming. It's structured to facilitate a clean transition for all parties." Judge Davis's slight frown suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by this characterization, but he moved on. "Noah Reynolds," he said, his tone gentling as he addressed her grandson directly. "We spoke privately last week, but I want to confirm your position has not changed. Do you understand what's happening today?" Noah stood, his voice remarkably steady. "Yes, sir. My mom is legally ending her role as my parent so she can move to Arizona. My grandmother will have full custody of me." "And you're comfortable with this arrangement?" Noah nodded, then added with unexpected eloquence, "My dad used to say that family is about showing up, not just sharing DNA. My grandma and Aunt Amanda have shown up for me every day. I'll be okay with them." A murmur rippled through the courtroom at the simple wisdom from a 12-year-old's perspective. Helen blinked back tears, recognizing James's oft-repeated philosophy in his son's words. Judge Davis nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Noah. You may be seated." After consulting several documents before him, the judge removed his glasses and addressed the courtroom. Having reviewed all relevant factors, including the guardian ad litem's recommendation, psychological evaluations, and my interviews with the parties, I find that the proposed termination serves the child's best interests under these specific circumstances. He turned to Rebecca. "Ms. Reynolds, are you making this decision freely and voluntarily without coercion?" Yes, Your Honor, she confirmed. And to the Carters, are you prepared to assume full legal responsibility for Noah's care and well-being? We are, Helen and Amanda responded in unison. Judge Davis nodded once decisively. Then, by the authority vested in me by the state, I hereby terminate the parental rights of Rebecca Reynolds with respect to minor child Noah James Reynolds, transferring full legal guardianship to Helen Carter, with Amanda Carter designated as successor guardian. The gavel struck with surprising gentleness, belying the monumental nature of what had just occurred. In that moment, the legal structure of their family was fundamentally altered, not creating something entirely new, but formalizing the reality that had been developing since James's death. As they gathered their belongings, Rebecca approached, hesitantly maintaining a respectful distance from Noah. "The apartment lease in Phoenix starts next week," she said, addressing Helen rather than him. "We'll be leaving on Tuesday." "I wish you well," Helen replied with genuine sincerity, the bitterness of their conflict having gradually dissolved into something more complex. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition of the human complexity beneath their adversarial positions. Rebecca nodded, then turned to Noah, uncertainty evident in her posture. After a moment's hesitation, he stepped forward and offered his hand with remarkable maturity. "Goodbye, Mom," he said simply. "I hope you find what you're looking for." Something flickered across Rebecca's face, regret, relief, a complicated mixture of both, before she briefly clasped his hand. "Take care of yourself, Noah. You're going to be an amazing person." She turned quickly after that, rejoining Kevin, who had remained strategically distant during the exchange. They departed without looking back, their silhouettes framed briefly in the courtroom doorway, before disappearing. Rebecca walking out of Noah's life with the same decisive finality with which the judge's gavel had fallen. Outside on the courthouse steps, Noah stood between Amanda and Helen, blinking in the bright August sunshine. "Is it really over?" he asked, his voice suddenly younger, more vulnerable than it had been inside. "The legal part is," Amanda confirmed, her arm around his shoulders. "The rest processing everything, building our new normal that's ongoing, but we'll do it together." As they walked to the car, Noah fell into step beside Helen. "Dad would be okay with this, wouldn't he?" he asked quietly. "He wouldn't think I gave up on Mom too easily." The question pierced Helen's heart, the child still seeking reassurance that he hadn't failed some invisible test of family loyalty. "Your father," Helen said carefully, "wanted one thing above all else: for you to be safe, loved, and happy. He would be incredibly proud of how you've handled this impossible situation with grace and compassion beyond your years." Noah nodded, seemingly satisfied with this assessment. "Can we stop for ice cream on the way home, to celebrate?" The simple request, so normal, so blessedly ordinary, felt like the first genuine step into their future. "Absolutely," Helen agreed. "Today calls for a double scoop." As they drove away from the courthouse, Helen caught a glimpse of Noah in the rearview mirror, his face turned toward the window, expression pensive but not despairing. They had navigated the most treacherous waters of their journey, not without damage, but without drowning. What remained was the careful, patient work of reconstruction, and for the first time since James's death, Helen allowed herself to believe they would not merely survive this ordeal, but eventually thrive beyond it. 1 year after the termination hearing, Helen stood in the doorway of what was now indisputably Noah's room, watching as he carefully arranged his science fair display on his desk. The project, an impressively sophisticated analysis of water quality in local streams, had already won first place at his middle school. Tomorrow it would compete at the regional level. "Do you think the graphs are clear enough?" he asked, adjusting the poster board slightly. At 13, Noah had grown 4 inches. In 12 months, his voice occasionally cracking as it transitioned toward adulthood. The gangly uncertainty of early adolescence was tempered by a quiet confidence that had gradually emerged as their lives stabilized. "They're perfect," Helen assured him, suppressing a smile at his perfectionism, another trait inherited from his father. "The color coding makes the data patterns immediately obvious." He nodded, satisfied with this assessment from a former English teacher. "Dad would have loved this project, wouldn't he?" "He would have been absolutely fascinated," Helen confirmed. Probably would have suggested 3 more experiments before you'd even finished this one." Noah laughed, the sound unburdened in a way that still occasionally surprised her. "Aunt Amanda said the same thing when I showed her the preliminary results. She wanted me to expand it to include watershed analysis." The easy mention of both his father and aunt reflected the healing that had gradually occurred over the past year. Amanda had accepted a permanent position at Seattle Children's Hospital, but maintained her presence in Noah's life through monthly visits and weekly video calls. Her professional success, recently published research on pediatric transplant outcomes, would have made James immensely proud. "Dinner in 20 minutes, Helen reminded Noah. "Diane and Dr. Shaw are joining us, remember? I remember," he confirmed, already turning back to make final adjustments to his display. In the kitchen, Helen put the finishing touches on a celebratory meal: lasagna, still Noah's favorite garlic bread, and a salad featuring vegetables from the garden they had started together last spring. Cooking had become a shared activity, one of many new traditions they had established in their reconfigured family. The doorbell rang just as she was setting the table. Diane arrived first, bearing her famous tiramisu for dessert, followed shortly by Dr. Shaw. Over the past year, the therapist had transitioned from professional support to family friend, her warm wisdom proving valuable well beyond the initial crisis that had brought her into their lives. As they settled around the table, the conversation flowed easily, Noah enthusiastically explaining his scientific methodology, Diane sharing amusing stories from her recent Mediterranean cruise, Dr. Shaw discussing the children's art therapy program she had established at the community center. "I've been meaning to tell you," Dr. Shaw said during a natural pause in conversation. Noah's case study, anonymized of course, has been accepted for presentation at a national conference on childhood resilience. His journey provides valuable insights for professionals working with children navigating family restructuring. Noah looked up with interest. "You're using my story to help other kids." "With your grandmother's permission," Dr. Shaw confirmed. "Your experience, particularly how you processed the termination, offers important lessons about children's capacity to adapt when provided with appropriate support and honesty." Helen watched Noah absorb this information, noting the subtle straightening of his shoulders, the physical manifestation of recognizing that his pain might serve a purpose beyond mere suffering. "Speaking of which," he said after a moment, setting down his fork, "there's something I've been wanting to show everyone." He disappeared upstairs, returning moments later with his tablet. "I found this while organizing old files last week. It's the original recording from the court hearing." The mention of that pivotal moment, Noah raising his phone in the courtroom, the devastating evidence of Rebecca's true priorities playing for all to hear, sent a ripple of tension through their celebratory dinner. "Are you sure you want to revisit that, sweetheart?" Helen asked carefully. They had rarely discussed Rebecca since her departure for Phoenix. True to the non-disclosure agreement she had maintained, complete silence, no birthday cards, no holiday greetings, no social media mentions of the son she had legally relinquished. "I'm sure," Noah replied with the quiet determination that had become his hallmark. "I think it's important." He placed the tablet on the table and pressed play. The recording began with Rebecca's voice, sharp, impatient, dismissive, of Noah's desire to visit Helen. But then something unexpected happened. As the familiar argument continued, Helen realized with growing confusion that this wasn't the same recording that had been played in court. This version continued beyond the argument about visiting Helen, capturing a conversation she had never heard before. "Mom?" Noah's voice asked, "Do you even want me to live with you?" A lengthy pause followed, then Rebecca's sigh. "It's complicated, Noah." "That's not an answer." Another pause. "If I'm being honest, I was never meant to be a mother. Your father wanted children. I went along with it because I loved him. But this role, it doesn't come naturally to me the way it does to your grandmother." "Then why are you fighting for custody?" Noah's voice was smaller, now vulnerable. "Because that's what mothers are supposed to do," Rebecca replied, an edge of bitterness in her tone. "Because admitting I don't want that responsibility makes me a monster in everyone's eyes." "Not in mine," Noah said quietly. "I'd rather know the truth than live with someone who resents me." The recording ended there, leaving a stunned silence around their dinner table. Helen stared at Noah, struggling to process what she'd just heard. "That's not the recording from court," she finally managed. "No," he confirmed, meeting her gaze steadily. "That one came later, after I realized what was really happening with Mom and Kevin and the trust fund. This was the first one from about 2 weeks earlier." Dr. Shaw leaned forward slightly. "You recorded this conversation and then chose not to use it." Noah nodded. "At first I thought if Mom admitted she didn't really want to be a parent, that would solve everything. But then I overheard her and Kevin talking about the trust fund, and I realized—" He paused, collecting his thoughts. "I realized that showing a judge she didn't want me would hurt her too much. It would make her look like a bad person. The money conversation was better because it was about them being greedy, not about her failing as a mother." The profound compassion of this decision, a 12-year-old boy protecting the dignity of the very woman who had failed to protect him, left Helen speechless. Even in the midst of his own pain, Noah had considered how to minimize damage to Rebecca's reputation. "That was an incredibly empathetic choice," Dr. Shaw observed gently. "May I ask why you're sharing it now?" Noah considered the question carefully. "Because I'm not angry anymore. For a long time I thought Mom gave me up because she wanted money more than she wanted me. That hurt a lot. But now I understand she gave me up because she knew Grandma and Aunt Amanda could give me what she couldn't. The money was just making it easier to admit the truth." The insight, profound in its compassion and maturity, brought tears to Helen's eyes. In that moment she glimpsed the man Noah was becoming, thoughtful, perceptive, capable of understanding human complexity beyond his years. "Your father would be so proud of the person you're becoming," she said softly. Noah smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "I know. That's why I wanted to share this tonight. I feel like I'm finally okay with everything that happened, like I can stop wondering if things could have been different." Diane, who had remained respectfully silent during this revelation, reached over to squeeze Noah's hand. "That's what healing looks like, young man. Not forgetting or pretending it didn't hurt, but finding a way to carry the experience without being defined by it." As they resumed their meal, the conversation gradually returning to lighter topics, Helen observed the people gathered around her table, this chosen family they had constructed from the fragments of tragedy. Diane, whose steadfast friendship had sustained her through the darkest days. Dr. Shaw, whose professional guidance had transformed into genuine connection. And most importantly, Noah, the grandson, who had become in many ways the heart of her life's second act. The journey from that first courthouse hearing had been neither straight nor easy. There had been setbacks amid the progress nights when Noah still cried for his father, moments when the absence of his mother still stung, despite her limitations, days when Helen questioned whether she had enough strength and wisdom to guide him through adolescence. But watching him now animated as he explained a technical aspect of his project to Diane, confidence gradually replacing the uncertainty that had shadowed him after James's death, she felt profound gratitude for the path they had traveled together. The recording that had changed everything in that courtroom had been powerful in its damning evidence. But this second recording, the one Noah had compassionately withheld, revealed something far more significant, not just the failure of one mother, but the extraordinary capacity for understanding in her son. Later that night, after their guests had departed and Noah had gone to bed, Helen sat on the porch swing Robert had built decades earlier, contemplating the journey that had brought them to this moment of quiet resolution. Her phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. "How did the dinner go? Is he ready for tomorrow?" "More than ready," Helen replied, and he shared something remarkable about the original recording. "I'll tell you everything during our call tomorrow. Can't wait to hear. Give him a hug from me in the morning. Love you both." Helen tucked the phone away, gazing at the stars visible above the trees Robert and she had planted when they first purchased this property. So much had changed, yet something essential remained constant. The love that had built this home continued to sustain it, flowing through generations in different forms, but never diminishing. In the quiet darkness, she whispered a truth that had gradually emerged from the chaos of the past 18 months. "We're going to be okay. And for the first time, she believed it completely. The choice to protect what matters most isn't always pretty or perfect, but it is always an act of profound courage. Sometimes the strongest love doesn't showcase itself in grand gestures, but in the quiet, unwavering decision to remain when others walk away.